Welcome back, everybody. Today we got another awesome guest for you all. A guy I actually met because he was being interviewed alongside me, which doesn't seem right because I read his books and they're way better than mine. But a awesome guy. I'm glad to introduce you all to John Hervey. Welcome to the show, John.
Oh man, thanks a lot, bro. And that's I feel very humbled that you would say that, bro, because there's a lot of good content out there right now.
Yeah, and I mean, nonetheless, I mean, it's just the amount of content that you have out there too, compared to Chris's one book. So
Yeah,
it's just some quality. I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff out there too, but your stuff is awesome. So,
I appreciate that.
Yeah. So, I mean, before we get started here, I mean, we always talk about origins in comics.
Yeah.
So, give us your origin story here. I mean, where did it all start for you? Were you always reading comics, or where did it all begin?
If it wasn't for comics, I probably wouldn't have been reading. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yep. It's like
I hear that.
my mom would buy me comic books, and like her friends would be like, "Why do you get him comics?" Because she's like, he'll actually read something.
Yeah. That's what gets me to read, honestly.
You know, it's like, are you sure he's not looking at the pictures? No, not 100% sure, but he's at least going for the words.
There's some words there. Yeah.
There are words there, and he's trying to understand the story, so it's all good.
Right.
I mean, for me, comics, it's the first medium that I fell in love with, and it's still my favorite. And I think in the last couple of years, it's become my favorite again, just because I see all the great indie work that's being done. When I, age myself, when I started reading comics, you could get them at the local drugstore.
Yep.
So like, I'd go with my mom. There's this place called Webster's. It was a pharmacy near where we lived. And they had a spinner rack, bro. And then they expanded to 2 spinner racks. So it was better than the 7-Eleven. There was a 7-Eleven across the street, but that had 1 spinner rack. But
one spinner rack, yeah.
Freaking Webster's, dude.
Yeah.
Had 2 spinner racks.
That's unheard of.
Oh, man, it was insane. There were so many books to choose from.
Yeah.
You go there and it's just like, I hope that mom is ordering every drug in the book and that it's going to take forever for her to get her stash.
Yeah, right.
Because
that's so funny.
you're sitting there and it's like, okay, I'm gonna take, if it's a good day, I may get 2 books.
Right.
I may come out with 2 books. So it's like, at the time I knew like I would watch the Super Friends. So like I knew Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman. I knew those characters, but like I hadn't pieced it together that they were the Justice League. So I hadn't figured that out. I'm like, there's no Super Friends comic book, but
right.
So I hadn't figured that out.
And like they explain it either. They don't like,
no.
They're not like
like they never just cross that bridge and just said,
right.
Which is fine, but it's just like I didn't figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, nah, if there's a Super Friends comic, I'd pick it up. But you know what? Here's Batman. I'll pick that up.
Yeah. Awesome.
And the old Spider-Man book our old Spider-Man cartoon was showing, like those old Marvel. So like I would pick up like Spidey, Thor, Iron Man. Those are the ones, the Hulk.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you what happened. And this is back in the day, it wasn't cool to be a comic book collector.
Oh, no.
So
way.
it's like,
even a reader.
Dude, no. So, I mean, at that point, I wasn't considering myself a collector, but I was a reader. But that wasn't cool. So it's like, It's one of those things where one of my buddies, we happened to see each other at the drugstore at the same time. We were both looking at the comic graph. So we found out we both like comics. Okay, cool. So that's good to know. So then he was collecting Daredevil. So I said, okay, I don't need to collect Daredevil because my man picks up Daredevil. Okay, so then what else? So I'm like, I'll pick up some other books, but he was already like, I'm a collector and I'm collecting Daredevil. I'm like, dude, that's pretty bold of you, man.
Yeah.
I was like, does anybody know you're a collector? Nah, bro.
I don't tell anybody. Yeah.
This isn't like information out for the masses. Like, that kid at school,
right?
That gets picked on because he brings his comics to school. Kid.
Yep. I wasn't gonna be that kid. No way.
I'm not gonna be that kid. So he was picking that up, and then one day I went to the comic shop, and I looked at this book, and it had this giant Crusher Creel on it. He was like on a freighter. He'd absorbed the freighter. He was holding up Miss Marvel, like the awesome Miss Marvel, not today's Miss Marvel.
Okay.
He was holding up Miss Marvel like he was King Kong, and Iron Man was attacking him, and the Beast was attacking him, and Vision. I was like, this looks cool.
Yeah.
little did I know that the artist was John Byrne.
Oh man, yeah.
So, bro, I picked up this book, and it was like, it was an epiphany. I mean, light the whole. I mean, like, I read this book over and over that same day. Yeah. And like we're in the car, my mom was like, don't read in the car. It's bad for your eyes. The car's moving. I don't care, man. We're at the dinner table. I still got the comic with me. She's, I'm like, hey, Mom, I am now a comic book collector. She's like, look, that's great, baby. Finish your vegetables. So I'm like, I just made like the biggest profession. Yeah. And it still stands decades later. Here I still am loving comics. Yeah. But man, that Avengers book, bro, I mean, the story, the art, I mean, it was just like the perfect meal. Like when you have all of the elements in there and it's all perfectly put together, and I was just like, and the thing is, you still have your own imagination, because even in between the panels, you have all room for your own imagination. I was like, this is the best. I got in my own idea. I got my own head, like what I think the different characters look, sound like, or whatever. And you're just like, oh man. Yeah. And I was just like, I love comics. I mean, this has to be the greatest thing ever. I remember when Spider-Man and his amazing friends were out, that cartoon. They showed, it was like the first time the X-Men were shown. Mm-hmm. And me and my friends were so hyped. Me and kind of like my underground comic book buddies, we were all so hyped for seeing the X-Men. And I wasn't an X-Men guy, I was an Avengers guy. But a lot of my buddies were X-Men guys, and I respected the X-Men. I thought they were dope, but I was like, look, I get 2 books maybe a week. I'm going to pick up a couple other books. I'm going to pick up the Avengers, probably not the X-Men at the time. Yeah. But I was like, hey, X-Men. And they had Wolverine on there. And it was dope. But the crazy thing was, like, it was probably maybe one of the better renditions of him, because they gave him like a French Canadian accent. So it totally wasn't what any of us had in our heads, what Wolverine would sound like. Oh man. So we were just like, it was cool but weird. We're like, okay. That's not what I was thinking about. Yeah. But that's cool.
It wasn't like when Batman speaks and it's Kevin Conroy and you're like, okay, that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like, okay, that's Batman. Yeah,
that's Batman.
But I was like, that's awesome. I was like, wasn't expecting the French Canadian Wolverine. Right. Right.
Nobody ever is, I don't think.
No.
I mean, that's kind of where Chris is. Chris was always an Avengers guy. Now you're finally reading X-Men, Chris, right? They finally pulled you over there.
For the first time in my life, Hickman got me to read X-Men. Like on the regular where I'm enjoying it all the time. I've picked up books here and there that I've liked, but never been like an X-Men hardcore reader.
Yeah, so that was kind of a transition for you too.
Yeah, I'll follow Hickman to the ends of the earth. I'm a believer in what that dude does and has done in the past, and I love his work. So I was more than willing to follow him into X-Men.
Yeah. So you got me to read Fantastic Four again.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's the only Fantastic Four in my life I've read that I enjoyed. Like modern stuff. I like some of the old stuff, especially the Byrne stuff, but like stuff that's come out in my lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, like for you to like pick up a book and it be Byrne art, it's like, oh yeah, that'll keep you reading comics for a while, I would think,
It'll keep you reading comics, but it also sets a high flipping bar.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just kind of like, you're following Hickman. I was following Byrne all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I followed him from Marvel to DC when he was doing like Man of Steel, and they did the first Crisis. You got Perez, you got Byrne. You've got just legends that are working on this stuff. I'm a kid, so I know it's awesome, but I can't fully appreciate the full awesomeness of it. It's just awesome. I'm like, this is great. This is what comics are. You've got Frank Miller working on Daredevil. It's just like, you look back on it and we're just like, holy smokes.
Yeah.
They're
like the legends of their time,
Exactly.
So eventually you were like, I could start developing characters of my own. When did that start for you?
I was always writing and creating. So I was making, stories with existing characters. Then when I was in college, a buddy of mine, he got a job as an editor. Motown had they set up it was supposed to be an animation division, but it ended up being just a comic book group because they never made any animation. Okay. And this was in the mid '90s. They set this up, and so I lived in LA almost my whole life. We just moved out to Houston in the last year, but in the Mid Wilshire district of LA, Motown had an office, and that's where they set up their animation group. Okay. So Michael Davis, who was one of the Milestone founders, him and his guy and a bunch of his his young guns. His studio was called Bad Boy Studios. They came from New York over to to LA, Miracle Mile area, and they established Motown Machine Works, which was the comic book. That was really kind of the name. And my buddy's like, hey, I think I can get you on board. So he got me on board as a gopher. Oh. So it was awesome. So I mean, I had my hands in everything. Really? I was hanging out with the cat. He was an editor. I was hanging out with the editing team. I was hanging out, like Chris Sotomayor. That's where he got started off as a colorist. Yep. So Soto, I was hanging out with Soto. I was hanging out with, a number of the artists. And at the same time, this was in the mid '90s. So Michael Davis had put a deal together with Image. So I got to meet. I became friends with folks like Murat Michaels, who's over at Extreme, who was in Anaheim with Rob Liefeld. Some older heads that no longer in the game so much, like Jonathan D. Smith, was over on the West Side with Top Cow. So the Top Cow guys, Michael Turner, rest in peace. His company was on the West Side as well. So just a lot of cool comic book kids, man. But those dudes, the difference was I was a gopher. Those cats, they were making money. Oh yeah. I mean, they were on books. I remember when I first, Murat and I had hooked up, and he drove out from Anaheim. He drove out in this crazy sports car, man. And I'm just like, and I'm got my bucket. And he's just like, hey, man. So I hopped in his ride. We went up to Melrose. There was a Golden Apple up there, which is a big comic book store. So we went and got some comics and just hung out and just talked a lot of crap and just had fun. And it was like a crazy time because it was such a speculative market that those guys that were creating books and that were on books, they were making big money. And that's why Motown got into it. They thought, oh, we're going to have million-unit books. Well, they got into it probably about a year and a half too late. Yep.
Yeah, I think a lot of people thought that. every book was going to be the million-unit book, especially when it blew up in the 90s.
Yeah. So, and that was the mentality. So the mentality is, hey, you know what? Yeah, they were making music. They're like, hey, man, looks like comics are even more profitable. We're going to get into the comic book game, and Michael Davis and his team, they're going to create IP and blah blah blah. So needless to say, the book sold a fraction of what they thought they were going to sell. So Motown's like, we're out of there. Right. But kind of the cool thing before that happened though was I got to edit some books, and then one of the last books that Motown Animation published called Trouble Man. Back in the day, well, it's still today for those that go to the comic book shop, that sell through the comic book shop, you got to go through Diamond. Mm-hmm. And Motown had already put their solicitations in for this book, but the writer ghosted. So my boss was just like, hey, look, you've been sweating me for like 2 years now about writing stuff. And I was always hitting him up with ideas, and he's just like, look, man, I got writers. You're getting a little bit of editing work. That's good. Can you just go get me some coffee and just understand? So I was like, so that was pretty much me. But then long story short, I got to write that miniseries just because the writer ghosted. My boss was like, it was like a Thursday. He's like, hey, I want you to come back on Tuesday. I need a story arc fleshed out. I need the first issue. And he put he's like, hey, don't worry about it. He's like, but you don't do well with this. You definitely won't be working anymore in this industry. But hey, no pressure. Just go make it happen. But I didn't tell Mike. I didn't tell Mike till years later that I actually had a whole bunch of stuff already written because I loved that story for Trouble Man and the artist Chuck Drost. All these kids, they were from New York, so none of them could drive. So they all lived really close to the office. Okay. So after work, we would either, back then Doom was the game, play Doom, or just, go riff about some comic book stuff. So I had a whole bunch of stuff already written up for him.
Yeah.
So my boss didn't find out until years later after I was no longer working for him. He's like, "Oh, you bastard." I was like, "Yeah, I pretty much already had the stuff already scripted out, but put that together." And he's like, "Okay, this looks good." And that's what we ran with. And that was the first time I was published. And that was cool, and it gave me the itch. But you know what? Being published once, it's by no stretch is that a guarantee of continued work. And I just didn't get continued work on any kind of a consistent basis that I could call a career. So doing my day gigs, doing my other stuff, and I think now with crowdfunding, with this community, I'm in a place now where I can at least start releasing books and just getting the machine moving.
Right. I mean, and successfully too, because you're almost at 1,400% with 7 days left on Magna. That's awesome.
No, man, I you know what? But it's going on shows like yours. I mean, this is what really moves this is what makes the whole machine work.
Yeah. Yep.
That's awesome. And that's why I think a lot of folks that maybe are, because the industry is changing now, folks that maybe have had a lot of success at the big two, they may find it challenging, It's a different world now. I mean, it's one thing to have, a Marvel stamp on your book or a DC stamp on your book and it sell. But it's another thing to have a book and just say like, hey, you know what? I used to write X-Men. Come buy my book. People still want to know what you're about. They still want to see what you're doing. And they still want to see that you're not, you're not a jerk.
Yeah. That's part of it too. You got to be nice on Twitter.
Oh man, so many lessons learned, man. So I mean, it's like you see people's egos, and you're just like, they just thought they were going to show up and throw up, and people were just going to scoop it and just eat it all up, and it's just like it doesn't. Come on, man.
Happen.
So was the first book you worked on when you decided to, you realized the indie space was there, you could do crowdfunding. Was the first book Black Tiger?
It was. And I have, probably like a lot of folks, I have submitted so many pitches to the big two over time. And I was actually talking with an editor, and this was a different idea that I started talking with an editor over at DC about initially. And then I was like, hey, can you kind of forget we had started having these conversations? He's like, what? I said, I think I'm going to try and tweak this idea and self-publish. And he's like, okay, yeah, sure, go for it. And this was kind of one of those things where I realized, you know what? I think I can do this myself. I think I can, bring this property to the table the way that I want it brought to the table. I have nothing against editors. You need an editor. Every book needs a good editor. But it's like, when it's not your property, you just don't have the say-so about certain things. And also, companies like that, they've got an idea of where they want their whole universe to go. And maybe what you're thinking just doesn't fit in with that. I know people get upset, but you can't get upset. I mean, it's their stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like if they got plans and what you're saying doesn't line up with the plans, you can either do something of your own or just, be butthurt.
Yeah.
So I was tired of being butthurt. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do my own book.
We've talked about it so many times in the show where we've been doing this long enough, and both Mike and I have been like a part of comics world long enough where I see an indie book come about and I'm just like, I guarantee you that was a pitch to Big Two, and it was turned down and they said, fuck it, I'll do it myself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it's funny how that kind of works, but so to me, it's like the Big Two, that's still, I mean, that's kind of where that is for sure where all of this started, and that's where everybody's heart is at. Mm-hmm. But I think now, it's kind of we're in kind of a renaissance right now for comics. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing a whole new set of folks that are bringing their projects to the table, their IP to the table, and I'm really excited to see what these next couple of years are going to bring and how this whole thing is going to kind of morph. Because, people said, hey, it isn't going to be sustainable to do what you guys are doing, but you know what? It's proving to be different than what some of the naysayers are saying. And I know it's going to morph. Whatever it's going to look like is going to morph, but we're all here. We're all a part of it. I think we're all going to continue to grow. We're all going to continue to figure it out more. And, we're all, I'm excited, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's cool to see how it's like evolved. I mean, from going from, okay, well, this book won't even ever get made to like, oh, let me throw it on Kickstarter or Indiegogo. And, oh yeah, a lot of people want to see this be made,
Yeah. And then you realize that the next part of the business then becomes, how do people get to see your book? So our industry now is so different than it was before, because before it was, okay, well, Diamond solicits to the retailer, and then the retailer puts the book on the shelves, and it's in the Diamond previews book, and then people either go get it or not. But it's totally different now. Now it's like, if you're not a part of, if you're somebody that has a show, then you're an integral part. If you're somebody that retweets and shares, you're an integral part of success. So I realize now it's just it's community now. It's absolute community.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people just in the general internet atmosphere, whether it's they have a show about knitting or comics or whatever, saying that the future is really just these close-knit small communities, a couple thousand to 100,000 strong.
Yeah.
And not as much trying to hit millions upon millions of people. Like, you'll still get those here and there, but more and more we're going to see these more close-knit communities coming together and like doing great things. And that's doing that, and then having all of us kind of intermingle together to get our stuff out there. It's a lot of fun. It's fun to be a part of and fun to watch happen.
And I think I agree. And I think part of what we're starting to see now is like, how do we share our audiences with each other? So it's like, we go on shows, but I think we're going to see more and more of that, whether it's, people having updates on their campaigns and pointing folks, hey, if you like this, you'll probably like that. Because when you think about it with comics, I mean, can you imagine if you just had 500 folks who just loved what you were doing and we're gonna back your stuff? Yeah. You're good to go.
Right. Yeah, you're good. You have a little, niche of people that like your stuff, and you can be happy with that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. And then you don't have to compromise. You can find the folks that like what you're doing. And I think that's the biggest thing for me in any kind of community is, get in where you fit in, see the things that you like. And if you don't like something, just keep stepping. You don't need to make any comments. You don't need to say anything if you don't like. It's not for you. That's fine. Not everything is for everybody.
Yeah.
Find the stuff you like, support it. If there's something you don't like, just keep your mouth shut, man. Just move on.
Right.
Just move
I mean, Chris and I will do that on the show too. Like, if we read a new book that came out, like, listen, this isn't. I mean, I can appreciate what this was. It's not for me, but if you're into this type of stuff, you can go check this book out. We won't ever like down talk about something, and it's it's amazing that I think some people think they have that platform to speak out, and they should about things, and it's like, no, it's better to be silent sometimes.
No, seriously, and I think as creators, I think we can all appreciate that more. Because we all need a little bit of grace as we're creating.
Yep.
It's like I also appreciate when people are trying to do something cool, because sometimes you pull it off really well, and sometimes you don't pull it off quite the way you want to pull it off. But I appreciate that. I'm like, okay, you know what? I see what you're doing. You're doing something cool. You've got a big vision. And that's why as I think as a creator, I definitely have a lot more grace, because I know I've done that too. It's like, man, that was so much better the way it was mapped out than the way it came out.
Yeah, and part of the fun of comics, and it goes for a lot of media actually, is the collaborative aspect of it. So sometimes the collaboration just doesn't work the way it's supposed to, and something along the ways doesn't hit. Sometimes it was a bad idea all along, and it's just okay, we got to move on from it. But there's a lot that goes into it. So I see sometimes where I'm just like, I kind of wish that writer just held out and worked with somebody else, because I think that they had a good idea that just didn't fit with the creative team they put together.
Yeah.
But
so speaking of that, creative team, let's talk Magna, the Last Pantheon, because I remember when Chris told me we were doing this interview and showed me it, I was like, this looks awesome, and I want to know more about this. I mean, so the Indiegogo is funded, right? But you still have 7 days left. Tell us about this idea. I mean, what is Magna?
So Magna is really a coming of age, and it's a hero story. Mm-hmm. So, the way the story starts is, and it's also a little bit of a period piece, a little bit. So it takes place in 1942.
That's not a significant year at all. I don't.
Nothing happening worldwide on that.
Yeah, nothing at all. Right?
My goodness. Yeah. And it's like you have, you have in America, you have the shadow of World War II upon America, and World War II is in full effect in Europe. Right. And this young woman, she is in a fictitious city called Tree City, Idaho, and she's living with her parents, and her parents have basically kind of hidden her away until this creature comes and attacks her home. And that's when you kind of get the reveal that this woman, she's extraordinary. She has extraordinary powers, and she uses her powers to defend her family. And this prompts some questions that lead to some answers that she didn't expect. She learns that she's adopted. She learns, and kind of that revelation, it sends her on a journey of self-discovery. So she goes to the homeland of her adoptive parents in Finland. And in Finland, World War II is fully afoot, so she finds herself in the midst of some of that action. And then she also, as she goes to discover more about herself, finds herself amidst the conglomeration of the last of the mighty men of old. So it's a conglomeration of Asgardian, Aesir, Olympians, Egyptian, and Chinese Pantheon members. And they've come together for the sake of survival. Now she finds herself in the midst of their struggle for survival. And as the story progresses, she learns more about herself, and she becomes a linchpin both for her survival and for theirs. So that's actually my pitch without giving away any spoilers. And that's why it's called The Last Pantheon. So Magna, The Last Pantheon.
Okay. And I mean, where we're at with the Indiegogo, I mean, you're funded, right? So I mean, this is all set for the first volume, and people are going to be getting that, right?
Yeah, so and the reason why the goal was so low was the production was already completed before the campaign began. So, my intent is, you hope your campaign does really well, but I didn't want anyone to feel like the risk they were taking was going to be that they weren't going to get their book. Okay. So, no matter how many people were going to follow this or back it, they're going to get their book. So now we're kind of in a place where I'm like, okay, well, the reception has been good, and kind of at a magnitude where, okay, we can keep this bad boy going. Now, with that said, Volume 2 is already completed as well, that will be released later this year. So what I want to do now is, with some of the funds that come from this campaign, of course, we have a lot just for fulfilling. But some of the other funds gonna use for the next volume of Magna. So my intent, my desire is, as I release campaigns, to have the production completed already. So that's one piece people can take out of their minds about worried about, is this guy actually going to deliver? Wow, he's only raised $500. Am I not going to get my book? No, you're going to get your book.
Yeah.
Okay. You're going to get your book.
And I don't think it's much of a spoiler because it's on the Indiegogo page, but as she goes through this self-discovery, she starts running into different mythologies throughout our times. So we see Egyptian mythology, Chinese mythology, Christian mythology, all these gods and creatures that are a part of it. How does that add into the story that you're telling here?
Well, I think it's a very foundational part of the story. You know, as you know, growing up, I was a big D&D player, and I always loved mythology in a big way. You know, I was the kid that like I could spend the afternoon just reading like deities and demigods, just have my head, you know, and then start reading other supporting material as well, whether grimoires or whatever. So I love to make, especially with comics, I love to make mashups of things that I love. You know, World War II was an amazing and horrific time in history. So, you know, and some things that I had studied and really kind of pertaining to what was going on in that part of Europe, what was going on in between Finland and Russia, you know, at the time. Those were elements I wanted to bring to the table, you know, into this. And I wanted to bring all these different pantheons that I'd studied. And the thing that I always found interesting about these different pantheons is the stories always had a beginning, middle, and ending. So I said, well, what if I tied the endings of these different pantheons together in my story? So that's kind of a part of the through thread, for the story, and tying some of these things together. And I take a lot of license. I take a lot of license in doing so. People may not see their versions of the particular deities or that they're used to, but I think it's a fun story, and at the end of the day, it's relatable because you have somebody that's just trying to figure out, what she's about, what does her life amount to, and that's something that everybody can, sometime all of us have said like, man, what is this all about, and what, and what am I doing here?
Right. Yep. Right. Now I'm questioning myself. Man, I thought, this is a heavier interview than I thought.
Sorry, man.
I mean, it looks amazing. The art is amazing too. So I mean, like, the art is just so detailed and like the very dense too. I mean, is that something you were really going for with the story? And
yeah, I was. I'm very fortunate, man. To have met some really awesome artists. So Marcio Abreu, who's the penciler, I already knew that he had the ability to bring all these elements that I wanted to the table because the story, it's kind of a little bit like an old school Marvel story because it takes you all over the place in a short amount of time. Yep. You're in the heavens, you're in Idaho in 1942, you're in Finland, yep. You're in, all these different places, and also these characters are larger than life. The book that I wrote before, Black Tiger, is much more of a street level hero.
Okay.
But this is, these are powerhouses, and I needed that to be portrayed well in the book. I needed that to be portrayed in the art, and even everything down to the lettering. I feel like even the letterist, Marco de la Verde, he captured it. It's like, when people get hit and stuff happens, it's like the lettering shakes, because,
I noticed that. Yeah, it moves with the hero.
Yeah, because this stuff is all, it's like these are, Herculean beings that are, when they fight, it's not just somebody got punched in the nose. It's somebody's going through a column, buildings get knocked down. Yep. So you want all of that, you want all of that effect, from the book when you read it. And one of the things I learned at Motown, when we would go to Golden Apple with Mike Davis, he would pick up books. But first thing he would do is he would just go through the sequential art. And I'm like, aren't you ruining the book for yourself? He's like, no. He's like, if I just go through the sequential art without reading anything, I can tell if the sequential art is telling the story the way it should. He's like, I won't know exactly everything, but the art should tell me, I should have a flow to the story. So I start with that. Then when I go back, the words should fill in the parts that I don't see. The words shouldn't tell me the stuff that I already see. It should fill in the parts that I don't see. And I wanted to make sure from an artistic standpoint that, somebody that was enjoying the flow of the story, like if you pick it up, you could just enjoy the flow of the story. And even though you wouldn't know exactly what's going on, you'd have a good feel, and it's there's a lot of action in this story too.
Oh yeah, for sure. At least from what we can see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, real quick, so we got Magna. The book looks awesome. Everybody go check out the Indiegogo. But this isn't the only book you've done. So we mentioned Black Tiger a few times, so we can talk about that a little bit. So you also got a few other ones. So let's talk a little bit about the other books you've done throughout your time.
Most definitely. So, like you said, Black Tiger, that was kind of the flagship book, and that, in terms of production, I first produced Black Tiger back in 2005 and through Diamond. Okay, so different world. When you're working, at least at the time when you're working with Diamond, I didn't even know which comic book shops were getting my books. So I couldn't really tell where my books were going or who, where they were selling and where they weren't. So it was that's okay if you're Marvel or DC, and who knows, maybe they got more information too because they're moving so many books. But if you're moving, just a few thousand books, which sounds like a lot, but for that model, that's nothing because the amount, the sense that you get on the dollar. I mean, I moved a lot more books through that, but I guarantee you I'm going to get a lot more capital to do more stuff with what we're doing with Indiegogo, even though the books are getting into fewer hands.
Yeah.
It just wasn't a sustainable model for somebody that was doing indie books like me. And, but the thing is, I guess I'm just a comic book geek and I love creating. So I continue to create books, and honestly, I didn't know exactly how they were going to be distributed other than kind of on my website. So that's kind of what I've done, thus far. So there's another Black Tiger book that's coming out in March, and which is kind of funny because you guys know I have some other properties, but the reason behind it is Black Tiger started to gain a following from the first book, and I didn't want people to wait too long. So we have another Black Tiger graphic novel coming out in the second quarter. I'll probably, by the end of this month, I'll release the sign up, the mailing list for it. Okay. And all the art is, all the pencils and inks are all done. So it's just a matter of completing some coloring and then the lettering. So that book will be, and it's written. So that book will be ready for, like a Q2 release. But then we also have some other books that I've written. One is called The Posse Fugitives, and that book is a combination. I mean, if I were going to say, if I had to give a pitch for that book, that's like, Boys in the Hood meets almost like I was going to say Spider Island, but not really Spider Island, but it's more of like if it were like just X-Men Island.
Yeah. Wow.
would be more like it. But it has some other elements in it as well. And just kind of as a teaser, you have a world where basically a bunch of metahumans are released on what is kind of like a New York. I call it the Decapolis, and it has 10 boroughs.
Oh wow!
But it's basically my New York.
Yeah. And
these guys get released upon this this city, and the city basically has to be quarantined. So you have almost like a self-contained ecosystem in there, and a lot of villains, but then you have some heroes, and it's kind of them figuring out who they are and then helping to reclaim, this area. So they were fugitives from the law, but then they become fugitives in this, in this city that is basically quarantined. And this is all, I had no idea about any kind of crazy quarantine stuff happening. This is just, this way predates that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So I have one graphic novel's worth of content already completed and the second graphic novel in process. So I want to release that after this next Black Tiger volume. And then the other story that I have is called The Orphans. And if I were going to give a pitch for that, I'd say it's almost like I don't know. It's like Gatchaman meets I don't know. Gatchaman meets Lilo and Stitch.
That's crazy.
So it's it's a story of some they're not really so much orphans as they are foster kids, and they find themselves, they live in the same city as in the Decapolis, kind of like the guys in the Posse.
Okay.
And they're on a micro scale. They're kind of dealing with, I guess it's a pandemic of sorts. That's
Right.
running rampant, and they find themselves with powers, and they're trying to save their friends.
Awesome.
These all sound awesome, man. I'm so excited to get my hands on Magna.
Yeah.
That book in particular really struck with me, but the other ones sound really cool too, and it's cool to hear they got more coming down the pipeline for some of these as well. So to everyone out there, if you want to check out the books, if you go into the down below in the description, I'll have the link to John's website and the Indiegogo. So go to those, check them out, buy some books. And other than that, John, where could people go to follow you further into the new year?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Beyond Time Inc. Beyond Time Inc. That is also my YouTube page, and I'm not super active on the YouTube, honestly, but there are some cool things there that you will find. In 2014, a buddy of mine from school who's an indie film director, he wanted to make a Black Tiger short film, so we actually did that. So Robin Shu, who played Liu Kang from Mortal Kombat,
Yep.
Angela Fong, who was a WWE diva, and some other folks kind of lead the cast. And it's a 20-minute short. It was kind of cool. It ended up winning a Spirit of Comic-Con award. So it's very much, it's not like a super high budget comic film, but it is definitely kind of like Comic-Con level short film. It was a lot of fun, and I appreciate everyone that was in it. Check that out. That's 20 minutes. Okay. And we have a 10-minute animatic that some artists and I put together for Magna, just kind of, really testing the waters. And I'll tell you my thoughts. I mean, it's like, I don't nearly have enough people following me to do that on a large scale, but I think ultimately, as this community grows, people will make books, and I think people will start doing that. They'll start putting together, whether it's animatics or animation, for their projects, and they'll be able to do it without really any kind of, having to worry about being edited, in a bad way, or censored, I should say. Editing is good, but censorship, not so much. And being able to make the stuff they actually want to make.
Yeah,
it's awesome, man. Thanks so much for being on. It was great talking to you, and we'll have to catch up in the future too, because I can tell there's some great stuff coming down the pipeline for you.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back on.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John.